Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on supporting students affected by sexual violence. I'm going to give it maybe just one more minute for any kind of latecomers, but I'm sure that you guys are also going to be, as it's a lunch and learn, eating your sandwiches. So we'll just give it 1 second and then we'll start. Oh, hi, Sarah. It appears you have a question. Did you want to put your question into the Q&A? And we'll be able to kind of, I'll be able to check that and answer that now. Or she may have pressed it by accident. Okay. I thought that might be the case. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Mercedes. I am a senior client executive here at Howden, working very closely with our partners at Health Assured. And today we're hosting a webinar on supporting students affected by sexual violence. This is a CPD webinar, so this will count to obviously towards your CPD points. And it is a really big topic, so we appreciate that there might be questions. So if you do have any questions, please do pop those in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll be able to go through those at the end. How this has come about is through a lot of conversations that we have with interactions with our clients. We found that actually there's been quite a rise in concern around this, but also a rise in students being affected by this as well. And we wanted to be able to do something to support the industry with that. So hence why we're doing kind of a series of webinars, and this is our first. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the amazing Maria, who's actually going to walk you through this today, and then we'll take questions at the end. Okay?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mercedes. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Hopefully, by the end of the session, you'll have some useful bits of information that you can apply day to day. A small introduction to myself. My name is Maria. I'm a clinical development consultant at HA Wisdom Wellbeing, and most recently qualified as an organizational psychologist as well. So my background is actually working with children and young people in the education sector as an educational mental health practitioner. So I often tend to get involved in kind of mental health and wellbeing within the student assistance program and around student and young people well-being. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I will just start off by saying, obviously, that the subject today is quite a difficult subject to talk through, perhaps quite sensitive, quite triggering for some people. So please do take the time to look after yourself if you do notice that it's a challenging topic that maybe you're not quite comfortable continuing through, or whatever it may be. Just a bit of a disclaimer that it is tricky, so please do look after yourself as we go through the session today. So with that being said, let's have a look at some of the outcomes that hopefully we'll be able to leave the session today having achieved. So we'll be firstly looking at defining sexual violence and consent in a college and university setting, but also generally overall, what is sexual violence and consent. We'll have a look at identifying the signs of distress and some common barriers of disclosure, how to respond to those disclosures in a trauma-informed, student-centered approach, know where to find internal and external resources, obviously looking at practicing supportive communication, but also importantly, boundary setting, and then navigating how to report, safeguarding, and referral pathways. Mercedes did allude to the fact that there is a Q&A function, and there is also a chat. So please, at any stage as we go through the session today, if anything comes out that's interesting or you want to make a point or any questions, please do submit them. And then we've got a bit of time at the end of the session today to allocated to answer all those questions for you, hopefully. Okay, so starting off with what is sexual violence and harassment? So the Equality Act of 2010 says that someone sexually harasses another person if they engage in unwanted conduct of a sexual nature and the conduct has the purpose or effect of either violating the other person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for them. So any sort of sexual act or attempt to obtain a sexual act without consent. So that includes sexual assault, rape, sexual harassment, stalking, image-based abuse, as well as a big one, something such as revenge porn, coercive stealthing, and spiking. The key principle here is consent. So it should be freely given, it should be informed, specific, enthusiastic, and it's withdrawable at all times. And a really important thing here is power dynamics. They really, really matter here, especially in the education context. So staff or student, supervisor, supervisee, power dynamics is a big one. So this is a bit of just a quick definition, so to say, of what is sexual violence or what is sexual harassment. So really focusing on the fact that consent is a really, really huge aspect of it, and we need to understand it a little bit better. So consent must be active and ongoing. So any sort of silence or lack of resistance isn't consent. So just because someone maybe isn't massively resisting doesn't mean that they are fully informed and happy to move forward and consent. Silence is also not consent. Intoxication, unconsciousness, or coercion invalidate any sort of consent as well. Student may freeze as well. So there might be no reaction. So that also does not equal consent. Here we get the nervous system response, that element of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. When someone's in a dangerous situation, whatever it may be, we have that inherent kind of natural reflex response of fight or flight. But there's also the freeze response where we feel locked, we feel frozen, we're not really sure what to do, how to react, or what to say. And it might come across as no reaction. But again, just because there is no reaction and we're freezing does not mean we are consenting to what is taking place. And it is contextual as well. So just because intimacy was consented to previously doesn't imply current or future consent either. It's contextual, it's about the here and now and being present here and now and consenting to the here and the now. So having a bit of a look into the scope of the issue overall, it might surprise you. I don't know if it surprises you or not, but it surprised me that sexual harassment, rape, or sexual abuse is actually the #1 most underreported crime in the UK. So if we think about all the different crimes that there are out there, the petty crimes, the theft, the slightly more severe ones, whatever it may be, the most underreported crime in the UK is anything to do with sexual harassment or violence or rape. So you might find that to be the case in your institutions as well in the education sector. Underreporting is very, very common, and many students will never disclose to either their institution or to any of the services such as the police. And all genders are affected. So sexual harassment isn't exclusive to one gender. It can happen to anybody. And some groups, of course, are at higher risk. They're the ones that perhaps are reported more frequently, the ones that we do hear about more often in the news, but it's not limited to just one. And being in a college or a university setting might add risks in this environment. Why? Because maybe they're away from home, maybe it's the first time that they live out, they have an element of freedom. If it's in a college as well, still they might have elements of placements or field works. Power gradients, as we talked about, is quite important, that kind of power dynamic. They might find themselves in vulnerable positions under individuals who perhaps are their supervisors or their mentors or whoever it may be, who maybe are not behaving in a way that a supervisor and mentor should. Also, lots of alcoholic-centric events or drugs as well. So anything to do with intoxication and inhibition involved as well in college and university settings more frequently than most other settings. So the general kind of scope of the issue here is that it's most likely to be more common in school, college, and university settings. It affects all individuals, and it is very, very highly underreported. So what impact does it have on the student? It impacts them in lots of different ways, but we'll have a look at the academic, emotional, and social links it has. So in terms of their academic impact, it will, of course, as you can imagine, impact their absences, missed deadlines, their ability to concentrate, memory difficulties, and perhaps reduced participation in any sort of events or during lectures, classes, whatever it may be. Completely withdrawing might be one of the things that you do recognize in terms of their academic achievements. Emotionally and physically, there might be a lot more anxiety and depression. Shame might be slightly more elevated than it typically was before. Lots of sleep disturbances, hypervigilance, and somatic complaints as well. And we're going to have a look at social safety as well. Isolation, so things such as avoidance of places or people, accommodation issues, and online harassment. The reason we've got all of these on the same slide is because naturally, hopefully, we can see how they all play into each other. If you are not sleeping very well, you're hypervigilant and feeling very, very anxious, it's not likely that you're going to want to be around lots of different people, lots of different places. You're most likely very exhausted, finding it very difficult to concentrate and have a good memory in your lessons. You're not going to want to go to your lessons and you're probably going to miss all your deadlines. So just naturally forming that link as to how all of these play a crucial part on the impact that it has on the student. And just the point at the bottom there in terms of trauma-informed practice mitigates harm and supports retention. So having some sort of information and informing your practice around the trauma that it impacts, the impact that the trauma has on the student is really, really important to help mitigate that harm and support the retention of the students there as well, and their academic achievement and so on. So these are the impacts that you may be able to see them and recognize them in some situations, but we're going to have a look at those that are probably slightly easier to recognize. What are the indicators that we might see? So there, of course, might be a sudden change in their attendance, in their performance, demeanor as a whole. You might find that there are reports from peers about concerning behavior or around safety, so word of mouth from friends of the individuals. Perhaps expressions like, I don't feel safe, something's happened, or I can't go to that class. Perhaps when you're asking for more information, they get nervous, they get anxious, they get withdrawn, they get frustrated. There might be a lot of anger as well. And there might be plenty of requests for extensions or alternative assessments without necessarily lots of detail. And what we might say here is never to probe necessarily for a full confirmation, or you must prove to me that this has happened, or you must show me that this has happened. In this situations in the education sector, the role is mostly to be opening a safe door to the support and making sure that they do feel heard, that they do have the option of someone to go to, someone to hear them out. Now, we talked about sexual harassment, sexual violence, rape being the #1 most underdisclosed crime in the UK. Why? Let's have a look at what some of those barriers to disclosure might be. And these hopefully will give you an understanding of what the barriers might be to help you avoid perhaps unintentionally minimizing or victim blaming anyone that might come to you and disclose concerns around sexual violence or harassment. So some barriers might include things such as fear. So fear of not being believed, fear of being blamed, or perhaps fear of being targeted again if they hacker, for example, finds out that they have disclosed this to someone and they know it's obviously them that's disclosed it, they might be fearful as to it might happen again or what that attacker might do to them again. Because of obviously concerns around confidentiality. But in this academic context, there might be concerns around their academic consequences if they do disclose it, the impact that the investigation is going to have on them, the impact it's going to have on their academic achievements, whether they'll be kicked out, whether they'll remain, are they going to be able to do their exams, are they not, what's that going to mean? So lots of different factors play in there as to, should I disclose it, should I just leave it, is it going to be more hassle than it's worth, and so on. Culture, immigration, or financial factors could be a really, really big one as well. So cultural backgrounds, different financial factors, different immigration status as well could really impact whether someone feels comfortable, confident, or even vocal enough to be able to communicate these barriers. Communicate what's happened, which then becomes a barrier to the disclosure. Perhaps if they've had any negative past experience with any sort of authority or services before, maybe they've attempted to seek help for and were completely turned down. Maybe they weren't taken seriously. Maybe they were completely minimized. Maybe they were blamed in some sort of way or shape or form. So again, that could be another barrier in terms of that connotation that I tried before, it wasn't successful, I'm not going to bother to do it again. They might really worry about as well the social impact it's going to have on them. So any fallout from friends or groups or cohorts or family even as well. So lots of different factors here playing in, both kind of practical around academic, around the impact it's going to have on them in their kind of academic field, financially, socially, but also fear for their own safety and fear of being blamed or not being believed. So it's worth having a think, what is our role here in terms of supporting and connecting? What I would suggest is firstly creating space. That's the most important thing that you can give someone who is in a vulnerable position, giving them an opportunity, an outlet, an option. So creating that space where you can listen, where you can believe them and avoid judgment. It's important that you do, however, also clarify your role and the limits of confidentiality quite early on in that conversation. You don't want them to feel somewhat betrayed once you say, okay, well, thank you for sharing that to me, but I'm going to have to share that with authorities. There might be elements of betrayal, there might be elements of anger, there might be elements of upset if they weren't aware of that and at the beginning. But what I will say is also offering options and information is a really important one too. So letting them choose the next steps as well, giving them some element of autonomy and decision making, where sometimes they might feel completely vulnerable and have no decision making capabilities whatsoever. And documenting it appropriately is also really, really important as well. So documenting it and following referral pathways promptly. What I will say here and really try my best to reinforce is that curiosity here is really important as opposed to interrogation. You're not expected to be necessarily a detective. You're not expected to be an interrogator and get all the information. Here, you want to be curious. You want to ask the right sort of questions to give the student or whoever they may be the opportunity to open up, but you're not necessarily interrogating and kind of trying to get the bottom of all the information, because in reality you mightn't know what to do with all of that. So again, that goes back to the clarity of your role and the limitations of your role as well, and when you will have to disclose and break confidentiality. And safety planning is really, really relevant here as well. So that goes back to the idea of documenting appropriately and following the referral pathways. So making sure you know where to go and what to do should a student come and disclose any concerns around sexual harassment. What are the pathways? If you don't know them, perhaps after the session today would be a really good opportunity to make sure you've got all that information ready to go should it ever come up for you. What can be the most difficult thing is we can prepare ourselves as much as we want mentally when it comes to, okay, if a student were to come to speak to me about this, this is what I would do, this is the approach I would have. But sometimes in the moment, it could be quite daunting. We don't quite know how to do that. So there is a model that can sometimes be really, really helpful when we are in the moment, sort of just to think of the acronym and try to bring ourselves back into it, because it's not an easy thing for us to necessarily have to hear and listen and observe and be a part of, never mind being the victim. Can you imagine how hard it is for them to come forward? But for us, even listening to it, it could be quite daunting of, gosh, this is a big thing. I don't know how to approach this. What do I do? So this model is really helpful perhaps to ground us in the moment when it does come to having that conversation with the student. So we've got the last model. So L, no surprise, for listen. So using open prompts, allowing silence rather than forcing lots of information to come out. Again, here we want to be curious and not interrogative. So avoid note taking during the initial disclosure, especially if it's disrupting the rapport. So if you are having a conversation with this student, try to be present there in the moment, focus that non-verbal cues such as your body language, your eye contact, your nods, your smiles, whatever it may be, is really, really important here, knowing that you are actively listening to them as opposed to sat taking notes because you need to get the information down, which of course you do, but we would advise as much as possible to try and be as present with them in the here and now as they are disclosing it to you, and then documenting as soon as possible right after that disclosure. A is for acknowledge. So just acknowledging the fact that they've come to you, thanking them for being open and having that discussion with you, because understanding how difficult it even is to have that conversation is really, really important. Validating their feelings, letting them know, I can only imagine how hard it is for you to have experienced that, never mind now having to sit and talk to me about it and relive it all over again. So thank you for sharing this with me, and I'm going to do whatever I can to support you. So just acknowledging the weight that comes with this conversation is really important and really, really validating for them as well. Support, of course, is a huge one. So offering the support information. So as I mentioned, if you're not familiar with the pathways that perhaps you have internally in your institutions, it might be a great opportunity to have a look at that. So you've got all the information there, but also external services, local services, NHS services, government pathways or online resources, whatever it may be, having that information there. So offering that information for them, be it medical, be it safeguarding, academic, reporting as well. So even if it says, academic, and they're having this conversation and they acknowledge the fact that they're really worried that they're not going to make the next deadline, they don't know how they're going to cope with the rest of the degree or the rest of the course. Academic information that, we can offer extensions, we can offer deferral or whatever it may be. Having that information there is really, really important for them, because then, as we mentioned in the previous slide, you give them the information and give them a sense of autonomy that they can make a decision that feels right for them and someone else forcing them to make a decision. So having plenty of information there to support them is really, really important. And lastly, and most importantly, is taking action. So explain what you're going to do. Again, so being familiar with what that pathway looks like, explain to them what's going to happen, how are you going to report it, agree what the next steps are, and ensure that they are immediately safe. So risk assessing there in the here and now, in that moment, is really, really important. So whilst it's important to get the information as to what's happened in that event, also making sure that they are safe here and now and moving forward is also arguably just as important. So hopefully this acronym is somewhat helpful, and as we mentioned, these slides will be shared and this is being recorded, so it's good for you to come back and have a look at it should you need to. So as we were responding in the moment, if we hold in mind this last model, it can also be helpful to have a look at some of the language that might be helpful for us as well. So just a couple of quotes there that you might find useful. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry this has happened. You're not to blame. What would feel the most helpful to you right now? I can explain your options and we can go at your own pace. Let's have a think about what feels right for you. And I need to explain my responsibility around safety and reporting. So just an element of transparency there for them can be also really, really empowering. So they have the decision as to what they want to share, what they want to do with it as well. Pitfalls to avoid, however, are also just as important. So try to avoid questioning or doubting too much. So, are you sure? Or why didn't you do X, Y, Z? Or kind of bringing in elements of doubt isn't necessarily the greatest idea once they're having that disclosure with you. Avoid promising absolute confidentiality, especially when you have safeguarding duties. That's why it's important to explain to them what the remits of the confidentiality are and what does safeguarding mean, who is it going to be disclosed to, and why it's important to them. Again, focusing on the fact that it's safeguarding them, looking after them and their own safety. Try to avoid imposing action as well. So, for example, you must report it to the police, you must do this, you must do X, Y, Z. Again, when someone's in that fight, flight, or freeze response, it's not the easiest thing to do when someone's imposing something on them. And again, that whole interrogative or investigative approach isn't always the best, especially during that first disclosure. So try to avoid asking why questions or too many leading questions. Ask more sort of open-ended questions for them to disclose as much information as they feel comfortable. But again, being mindful that it's not necessarily an interrogation, and it's really important that it's more of a curious conversation with the student themselves. So when it comes to immediate risk assessing and safety, have a think. Is the student safe right now? Do they have somewhere safe to stay? Is there any need for urgent medical care? So is there a risk of injury, of pregnancy, of any sexual transmitted diseases? Is emergency contraception needed? If possible, inform them to perhaps preserve evidence if they are considering a forensic exam, but only if the student wants that option. So you even knowing that that's an option is great for them because they might not even know that. So letting them know you can preserve the evidence if you'd like, if you wish to go down a forensic exam, not washing your clothes or putting it in a paper bag or whatever it may be. If there was a concern of spiking as well, again, having a think about urgent safety and medical considerations. Do they need medical advice? And explain the limitations of toxicology timing as well. So here's some important points as well in terms of kind of any immediate medical action that might be needed to be taken for the student when they're making a disclosure to you. So having a look at the confidentiality, safeguarding and reporting duties, we've alluded to it a couple of times so far, but again, being really transparent and explaining the limits of confidentiality really early to them. If there is a risk to serious harm or to the student or to others, escalate it as per your policies. So again, making sure you are familiar with your policies, but also government guidelines as well. Follow your institution's mandatory reporting as well. And give the student choice. So reporting to police or formal complaints is the student's decision unless there is real serious immediate risk. So again, giving them the opportunity to have that autonomy, to have that empowerment to make the decision should they wish to disclose it to authorities if needed. A helpful tool to help with this decision is a decision-making tree. So having a look at something like this, what do I do next? Now, this of course, can be tailored and adjusted based on your institution, based on your own policies, but here's a relatively useful template should you wish to base yours off of. So what do I do next? So a disclosure is received, of course. Thank, validate, assess immediate risk and safety. You might wish to use that last model that we talked about. So making sure you are present in the here and now when that disclosure takes place, and listening nice and carefully to the student. Explain the confidentiality limits and the options that they have. So, of course, you need to also have the information and the options ready at your disposal so that you know the student. If there is immediate risk, of course, follow the emergency pathways. So ensuring that the student is safe, do what you need to do in terms of medical disclosures or referrals if they are at immediate risk and serious safeguarding concerns are present in the here and now. If there isn't any immediate risk, offer them the choices in terms of the medical support, the academic adjustments, any reporting kind of suggestions as well could be really helpful. Document it and notify per policy. So again, being familiar with your policy is really important, and documenting it is also just as important. And if you can, follow up with the student. So not necessarily bombarding them consistently, because that's another thing that is sometimes a barrier to disclosure, where some students might then feel suffocated and they wish they never said anything because now it's just resulted in being bombarded with check-ins. So light check-ins with them, still obviously concern over their well-being, but following it up within 24 to 48 hours to check if they did connect with any of the services, maybe touching base with them a couple of days later, once a week, the second week, and just light touch kind of communication and contact with the student is a good way to still ensure that they are safe, that they are making contact with the services that you suggested, but also being careful not to smother them, which is, again, as I mentioned, one of the barriers to disclosure. So some case variations that you might encounter in your institutions can look quite different. So you might have a staff student or supervisor supervisee conflict. So there could be a conflict of interest there. So they would need to escalate it to someone else. They need to be aware of who the designated officers are, who is the right person to raise safeguarding concerns to. There might be image-based online abuse. So things such as digital safety and security teams as well. You'll slowly realize that there's lots of different teams that will be involved in all the different variations that can come up with sexual abuse, sexual violence, sexual harassment, because it's no longer isolated to strictly in person. It doesn't have to be that they're in the same room, in the same environment. Online is escalating massively now. So that can online, so your security teams, your digital teams might be involved in this as well. There might be field work or placement in. So again, you need to confirm which organisation's procedures applies and who the safeguarding lead is in that situation. And there could, of course, be historic incidents. So support still applies and options do remain available, even if the event is historic. So as we mentioned previously, in terms of some of the barriers of support, one of the things that we talked about is the element of culture. Culture can be a really big barrier when it comes to disclosures of anything related to a sexual nature. So it's important that we do work inclusively and responsibly from a cultural perspective. So we would advise as much as possible to avoid any sort of assumptions around the gender, the culture, or their sexuality. If necessary and where appropriate, do offer interpreters and accessible formats when needed. Again, this should be optional, especially for interpreters. One of the things that you might come across is if there are students from a particular cultural background, having another individual there who speaks the same language, perhaps from the same country, from the same cultural background, could be, in fact, a barrier to that because of the stigma and the taboo that comes with discussions around any sort of sexual nature in that culture. So offer the interpreter if where appropriate, and it might be the case that that's something that they would massively love because someone to speak their language literally can translate it to them. But also don't be shocked or offended if they decide to turn that down, because it could be elements of shame or embarrassment of speaking about that topic to someone from a similar cultural background. And also be mindful of disability related access needs and coordinate with disability services where needed as well. So should any sort of disability be associated with the student who is disclosing this sexual violence or harassment, again, taking that into consideration and coordinating with the services where appropriate. Now, another big one is any academic adjustments and flexibility. So we've alluded to it that there should be support in place as well, should any sort of challenges arise for the students from an academic perspective. So perhaps offering any sort of extensions or deferrals, alternative assessments or attendance flexibility as well. Perhaps no contact arrangements, so timetable changes or room changes where feasible, depending on the situation and again where appropriate. Coordinate with student services to avoid the student retelling their story multiple times. Again, this is really important. So having that clear communication with all the different services or teams that are involved is crucial, because it can be one of the most difficult things to re-talk through such a traumatic event so many times to so many different people over such extended periods of times. Sometimes it can feel like there's no escape from it. So trying your best to coordinate and communicate with all the teams as effectively as possible is really in the best interest of the student at this point in time. And any sort of fieldwork or placement adjustments and safety planning could be really important here as well. So if the issue, the harassment, the disclosure has come from their placement or from their place of work, there needs to be a decision and discussion had there about, are they safe to return there, or does that placement need to come to an end? As I mentioned and alluded to earlier, it can be difficult for you as the receiver of the information to even hear about this and learn about something so terrible that's happened to a student. And so your boundaries and your self-care is also really, really important. It's okay not to have all the answers. You're not expected, as I mentioned, to be a detective. You're not expected to have all the answers and all the information. Try your best just to focus on the connection and with the student and knowing where to forward that information to. If you can, use any supervision that you've got or peer debriefs, and monitor compassion fatigue, which is a really, really big one. So when we are supporting others or there for others in a compassionate situation or in a compassionate context, you as the compassionate individual can start to become very fatigued, very tired, very burnt out. Not necessarily because the task that was done was necessarily massively challenging or needed a lot of energy, but from your headspace, from mentally and physically how you will feel, you can get massively exhausted and massively fatigued. So keeping an eye out for that as well. And if you are impacted by the disclosure in any way, shape, or form, it is really important that you also get the support that you need. So making use of your employee assistance program, your EAP, or any sort of staff wellbeing that you've got as well. And most importantly here is really avoiding any personal disclosures as well. So having those boundaries is really, really important. So even though you think making this disclosure might be helpful for the student to relate or to resonate with you, try your best to avoid that, because it can shift the focus away from the student themselves, but it can also put you in a vulnerable position as well. So being very, very mindful of those boundaries and your self-care as well. So just as we come to near the end of the session today, I thought it would be helpful just to have a look at a couple of myths and facts. So starting off with a myth is, if they say no, if they didn't say no, it was consent. So the answer is no, consent must be affirmative and it can be withdrawn. So just because they didn't say no doesn't mean they said yes. Reporting always means police. So in fact, no, there are multiple options that exist and it's the student's choice that is central here as well. And finally, talking about it makes it worse. So No, not necessarily. If you have a sensitive and choice-based support, it can really reduce the harm and the challenges that come with making a disclosure or talking about it, especially if you've got really good, clear communication pathways with all the different teams that are involved. Maybe they just have to talk about it that one time, and then support can be put in place just as needed. So just before we move on to any questions and answers, I thought it'd be helpful to give you a little bit of a what to do now, or what are your next steps after this session. So it might be helpful for you to create a sort of one-pager crib sheet, a response crib sheet with all the key contacts, as I've alluded to, having all the information there, perhaps in one folder, in one file, in a one-pager, for you to have all the information there should you ever come across a situation where a student wishes to disclose something like this to you. You've got it all there, you know exactly what to do, and that removes your decision-making fatigue as well, that you know what to do, it's all there for you. Add your student assistant program details to your email signature. So adding the SAP, the HA Wisdom Wellbeing, to your email signatures so students know that they can access support with us as well at HA Wisdom Wellbeing should they wish to do so, for emotional wellbeing support. Identify where to signpost. So on your module pages, on your handbooks, on your intranet, on your email signatures, on posters, in the toilets, in the hallways, wherever it may be, making sure where you post that information for the students and for yourself. And discuss with your team how you'll handle first disclosures consistently. So perhaps off the back of this session today, you can have a meeting with your team members, with your groups, whoever it may be, and have a clear plan as to should disclosures come our way, this is how we will deal with it. Create it as a one-pager, add those SAP signatures, the details into your email signature, and have it all there ready for you should you ever come across a situation where a student would be making such a disclosure to yourself. So with that being said, we've got a couple of minutes for a Q&A. So I'm just going to go back to the chat. Mercedes, has there been anything that's popped out anywhere as we've been going through the session today?
Yes, yeah. So there's been kind of a back and forth around a certain type of question. I'm
Okay.
just trying to find it now, actually, because I've gone to a slightly different one. But the question is, um, so Emma Shepherd from UE has asked, do you have any tips on how to handle kind of a situation where someone is saying that the person could be lying during a sexual assault disclosure? When she was delivering sessions over the summer, someone pushed back on the idea of believing the student and said, well, they could be lying. She'd love a kind of advice on how to approach that.
Didn't quite understand the question. So who would be lying in this context? Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
So I think in this context, it's the case of the person who's describing the disclosure, who's actually disclosing
Right,
that they've been a victim of this, that people could be perceiving that they are lying,
right.
and that's kind of as you've alluded to, it's one of the barriers in terms of it being believed.
Yeah.
But how would you approach when people say, well, they could just be lying? So another maybe another student might be
Oh, right.
saying that.
Right, okay. I mean, in that context, it's absolutely being completely transparent, whether they're lying or they're not lying. With the time, the space, the opportunity for them to talk about it is available, and we will take it seriously. If we do find out that they're lying for whatever reason, then we'll deal with it appropriately. But it is a serious subject to be taken very seriously, and actions need to be um, actioned, really. So if it is someone accusing another person of being a liar about said topic, I wouldn't allow that to sway any sort of response or actions off the back of that. Any sort of disclosure or mention of sexual harassment should be taken very seriously and actioned where appropriate.
Okay, I know that there's been kind of a back and forth in the chat, and we'll see if we can share that with you so that you also get a different perspectives as well. But it's more approaching with compassion and understanding rather than judgment. I'm assuming is what you're is more around the point of it.
Yeah.
Um, we do have another question here from Laura Such. Can you clarify mandatory reporting? If the victim is under the age of 18, is it a mandatory requirement to report assault slash rape? But when over the age of 18, it's their choice whether to report it to the police or not?
So I think that depends on, we'd have to check the government guidelines around that one to be completely honest. Off the top of my head, I think the mandatory reporting is yes, if they are under the age of 18 because they're still deemed a child, um, that would need to be reported to the authorities. But as when they become an adult, obviously, then that's when confidentiality slightly changes and the duty of care slightly changes, and they are, as an adult, um, it's up to them where they wish to disclose it. But it would go back to the government guidelines themselves, and I would imagine it's the same with all sorts of safeguarding. So should any sort of safeguarding concern happen to a child, what's the mandatory reporting pathway through that? And I'm pretty sure it's the same for any sort of sexual harassment, but I can clarify that and check and get back to you all. But I would imagine it is, as we mentioned, under the age of 18, yes, reported because they're a child, but over the age of 18, technically they're an adult and it's up to them.
Okay. Thank you for confirming on that one. Um, We've got a comment here from Jenna Morwood. She said thank you, and she said here that if anybody finds themselves in this situation, um, she says that she recommends that it's a good to work with another safeguarder to keep you balanced, and also it's not easy to kind of leave your own feelings about the situation to the side,
Mm.
and having someone to work with can keep that more balanced as well. She said it's a game changer actually.
Mm.
Would you agree, and would you have anything to add to that?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I was hoping to highlight when it comes to self-care and boundaries. Even if you yourself as an individual have never, experienced any sort of element of sexual abuse or harassment or anything, even just hearing about it and hearing of someone else's horrific experience can have such a draining and damaging effect on your well-being as well. So making sure that you have someone that you can talk to, that you're there as a team. And again, that goes back to the point that was just in the previous slide in terms of making sure you and your team have a clear action plan, that you're all on the same page together. You can talk about it to each other, and just having someone to lean on and making use of your supervision, other safeguarding leads, or your EAP is, yeah, it's absolutely invaluable here because it's such a challenging and difficult topic to not only talk about but also hear about. And if someone trusts you enough to come and disclose it to you, there's also that big weight on your shoulders. It's a big responsibility to carry, and that's not easy to work with. And it's invaluable to have someone to bounce ideas off of and get some support. Definitely.
Lovely. Thank you for confirming on that one. Um, Hannah Plumley, I have said that correctly. Plumley, yes. She works in student accommodation, and if something has been disclosed to herself or a colleague, from a safeguarding perspective, would you recommend that they provide the correct resources, but as well as, but also inform the university?
So working in student accommodation from a safeguarding perspective. So that would go back to the agreement or the policies that you have with the university. Again, this is why hopefully off the back of this session today, it can open up a lot of conversations between accommodation providers, between universities, between colleges and placements, whatever it may be, because this goes back to what agreements do you have in place. Um, but again, that is up to the student if they wish to share that with the university or not. I'm assuming they're over the age of 18 if you're a student accommodation in the university, so they are an adult. You can suggest it or perhaps recommend it to the student that it would make sense, because then they can get adjustments academically and so on. But whether it's mandatory for you to report it to the university or not, it's based on what agreements and policies you've got in place with them. And if you don't have any yet, hopefully this could be a trigger to that conversation and making sure that's all in place for you all.
Yeah, and it also goes kind of back to handling the first disclosures consistently and making sure that
Exactly.
those processes in place to also validate but make the student feel safe.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. I think we've now kind of come to the end of some of the questions, but we've got one here. So, will you have access to the online resources mentioned in this webinar today? So, you will do. We will be sharing out the live recording of this, as well as a kind of a follow-up email that's going to have a little survey. If you don't mind, it's got 3 questions, and just to kind of make sure that we're going to keep delivering these and making them relevant. We want to know what you're kind of looking at. If you do have any further questions, or would like to be connected with Maria, or to one of our team, or to one of the university who may be able to provide a bit of support in terms of the structure and the processes around that, please do let us know, and we can see if we can facilitate that. But otherwise, thank you very much, Maria, for delivering this. It's been really insightful, and hopefully it sparks a lot of conversations, and making sure that the support is consistent for students.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for having me. And hopefully it's gonna spark some conversations off the back of the session today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.